Hey guys, today's video is about JRPGs that betrayed the fans. Being good or bad is not that relevant because the fact remains that people were let down big time with these releases. We are gonna find out the reasons why, so let's begin! Number 10, Breath of Fire 6. To think that Capcom was once a great company in the service of its fans. Management must have changed greatly to have them experiment with such a beloved series in the worst possible way. First, we felt somewhat betrayed with the bizarre anathema that was Dragon Quarter on the PS2, a game that felt nothing like a Breath of Fire title, deviating itself from the traditions. I like it when JRPGs try to evolve positively, but not when drastically changing the very core and purity of their existence. After this roguelike shenanigan, the series just died off, and fans blamed Capcom. Eventually there was a revival, but in the most insulting way possible. The atrocity Breath of Fire 6, exclusive for phones and exclusive to Japan, was released. A worldwide fan base was left heartbroken by this sudden abysmal comeback. It was unbelievable how Capcom even dared to officially call it Breath of Fire 6, treating it as a mainline release, not a spin-off. It was an action RPG, a free-to-play online game with microtransactions galore. It even came out for PC, but like I said, and thankfully, only its country of origin got it. It looked generic, effortless, boring, with poor controls, lame AI, dull graphics and major glitches even. It was trashed by everyone around back in 2016. A year and a half, their servers were shut down and the game disgracefully disappeared. I can't believe other JRPG developers didn't learn from Capcom's harsh lesson and also released the same crap on phones, but at least they didn't treat them as official main titles. Number 9, Parasite Eve 2. 3 years after the events of the first game, Aya Brie now works for the FBI. She gets sent to perform an investigation in LA about mitochondrial creatures. Once there is when we realize this game is completely different now. Even its developers, even the staff, Yoko Shimomura, the music composer, is gone now. And now it's more of a survival horror than an RPG. It has tank controls, oh yeah. The ATB combat is gone, including the range dome, that grid sphere the first game had to select your actions or target enemies. Now it plays straight up like one of the old Resident Evil games. Still, we encounter the parasite energy that feels more like a magic system, but it isn't treated as a highlight in the game. The leveling system is now more based on the abilities Aya acquires using experience gained from fighting enemies, the same enemies you now can see around. I also think the storytelling fell apart, despite still being somewhat interesting, just lackluster compared to its prequel. As a survival horror game, I think it's decent, not fantastic, but it's okay. A good time if you manage to overcome its difficulty spikes. But as an RPG, it feels like it's not even one anymore, perhaps not even worthy of bearing the Parasite Eve name. I can't imagine how betrayed a lot of fans must have felt when this sequel came out. I say this because I played it first, years before I got into the original. Number 8, Lunar Dragon Song. I'm gonna be quick on this one because I've lost count on how many times I've trashed it. I did it recently in my top 5 worst Nintendo DS JRPGs video, but I just couldn't leave it out because it's a poster child for JRPGs that betrayed the fans. It was bad, generic, with lame mechanics, losing health while running, and a combat system that made you decide between getting items or experience. Sure, it's not an absolutely terrible game, it's still playable and there are ways around the stupid penalties, but why did the developers make it this way? As a prequel to the series, with lazy storytelling and boring gameplay design, I just don't get it. This is what happens sometimes and quite often when you handle the development to a different studio with barely any experience in the field. We'll see more examples of this throughout the video, so let's move on for now. Number 7. Shining Soul. So this is one such example of what I just mentioned. Camelot Software Planning quit Sega after releasing Shining Force 3 on the Sega Saturn in 1997. 5 years later, Sega thought they could revive the series, but in the form of a reboot and in the form of an action RPG. Exactly the opposite of what fans wanted. No more strategy. So they hired Nextech, developers of Crusader of Santi on the Sega Genesis, and Grasshopper Manufacture, with zero experience whatsoever in RPGs. No, Suda51, the director of the company, had nothing to do with this. Shining Souls turned out to be a disaster. Sluggish controls, poor movement, boring combat, repetitive gameplay. It's one of those quest-driven games with only one town. Nothing wrong with those, but this game is a lame execution of that idea. It feels like a really low-budget title that proved Sega couldn't care less about the Shining series. What baffles me the most is that they had the nerve to develop a sequel, which was better, true, but still forgettable and mediocre. Stupidly enough, they didn't give up and continued in the action RPG route on the PS2 and so on. Eventually we got to Shining Resonance Refrain, an enhanced port of the Japanese-only title on the PS3, which was a good action RPG, but once again just full of problems. You know, some of these action RPGs are decent, some I even personally recommend, but it's been 25 years since the last true Shining Force game, and still Sega refuses to listen to the fans. One of the biggest betrayals of all time in the history of gaming. Number 6. Digimon Survive. Well, I love this game, but I don't like the Digimon series. I've played a bunch of them, all unsuccessful to grab my attention. However, I respect the series enough to admit that Survive, while still a great release in my opinion, betrayed the fans. Why? Because of the type of video game it is, away from the usual Digimon RPG. First, it's a visual novel with a gritty story, clearly not for kids, with some psychological themes and tragedies involved. It's dark, alright, surprisingly dark, but I think most Digimon fans just didn't want to read through a story that, well, you know, it's very interactive. You're not just reading text and clicking the action button to read the next. But still, this isn't what Digimon fans wanted. Second, it's a grid-based strategy RPG. There shouldn't be a problem with that. Why wouldn't fans venture into one of these, right? Well, maybe that's the one part of the game that got less steam from the masses. But it's isometric with SMT influences kinda on the easy side, so the criticism had every right to be mixed. I strongly recommend this game for people who aren't fans of Digimon. I think it's fantastic, especially the story. But in the end, I mostly recommend you to try it out and decide for yourself, fan or Digimon or not. Number 5. Arc the Lad, End of Darkness. That's a fitting name for the game that killed the franchise. It did come back in the form of, guess what? A mobile gacha crap, another betrayal. Nevertheless, most people didn't care for this release because outside of Japan, JRPG players couldn't care less about free-to-play BS. End of Darkness, however, felt like a much greater and much more painful backstabbing when it came out in 2004. It was an imbecilic attempt, like many companies of this era, to switch from turn-based to action. It featured characters across the series as playable, but with no true story or development to them, so it felt like nothing but a fan service charade disguised as an official 5th title in the franchise. I can't believe Cattle Call developed this, probably forced by Sony, to make that risky change to its battle mechanics. True strategy RPGs were starting to struggle back then, but there was really no reason to have the series evolve into this turd. It's inexcusable! Both the plot and its gameplay mechanics were lamentable beyond belief. It even featured an online multiplayer mode, but the servers were shut down in less than 2 years. Instead of focusing on telling a good story, a decent follow-up to the masterful Twilight of the Spirits, it went on to insult the players with bad writing and poor controls. The magic from the tactical system was gone, now met with a below-average action combat. Another JRPG that betrayed the fans. Number 4. Nelke and the Legendary Alchemists. I think a lot of Atelier fans, including myself, were expecting a big crossover one day, a fan service game that will feature many characters across the long-running series, to see the guys from the Iris trilogy engaging with the alchemists of Sophie and the like. Instead, we got what feels like a mobile gacha SimCity ripoff that someone deranged at Ghost crafted in a few days. Nelke isn't even an alchemist, just a town administrator, so you, as the player, must invest in micromanagement to improve the city, acquire resources, build stores, and such places. In other words, nothing you actually do in an Atelier game. It isn't fun either, since it's overly complicated with several time limits stressing you out thanks to your own lack of understanding. There is, however, alchemy involved, as many alchemist characters from the series will join to craft their stuff. There's also a battle system that is turn-based, but one that feels more like it plays on its own, like it's just kinda there to break free of the town building simulation every now and then. It's decent, but it just doesn't deliver. It feels empty and meaningless. All the while the game itself controls the whole party moving from point A to point B gathering items. It's boring, uninspiring. All in all, this was a poor attempt to bring the series back together and please the fans as a decent crossover. It isn't bad, but it definitely is a JRPG that betrayed the fans somewhat painfully. Number 3. Tokyo Mirage Sessions. This game had to be here because there can't be a bigger betrayal to both Fire Emblem and Shin Megami Tensei fans. This J-pop idol-focused story is absolutely not what you'd expect from a crossover of those two legendary series. Why in blazes would they do this? The best they could come up with by mixing the two was this cheesy, colorful and super cliched plot. It's like being brutally slapped in the face or whipped several times to death by both Atlus and intelligence systems. As a big fan of both, I've never felt more betrayed in my life. What were they thinking? But to everyone's surprise, the game was positively reviewed. It got some awards even. It got an enhanced port on the Switch and it's been treated as a good JRPG. Well, maybe it is, but that's beside the point. I really do believe people will play and love anything the internet tells them nowadays without even questioning it. They just don't care as long as the big magazines and social media praises them. What are we gonna get next? Another idol simulator, but now between, I don't know, Xenoblade and Valkyrie Chronicles? At least this game wasn't an action RPG. Number 2. Final Fantasy XIII. I think Square Enix first betrayed the fans with Final Fantasy X-2, but we never knew if it was a main title in the series or not. It may have betrayed Final Fantasy X fans only, but not fans of the series as a whole. They had the nerve to call an MMORPG as 11, no reason why. Online gaming was becoming really popular in 2002, so Square thought it would be a good idea to make it their next main title. Anyway, along came Final Fantasy XII in 2006, long awaited and anticipated, to a commercial success. I mean, the game was awesome, and it eventually got a really cool remaster, but it just didn't feel like a Final Fantasy game, more like a game from someone else. Square Enix betrayed this guy and changed several aspects of the game, especially story-wise, introducing one of the lamest JRPG protagonists of all time, Vaan. But I digress. There was no bigger betrayal than Final Fantasy XIII. It felt cheesy, poorly written, with the plot being all over the place, almost as if scripted by Tetsuya Nomura. Well, it was handled by Daisuke Watanabe, mainly known for the Kingdom Hearts series and the guy that changed a lot of things in Final Fantasy XII. So if its predecessor didn't quite feel like a Final Fantasy game, imagine this one. Even in terms of gameplay, with a battle system that combined real-time with turn-based, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. Perhaps the worst part of it was its exploration. The traditional style the series was known for all of a sudden was completely gone for most of the game. All you did was go from point A to point B in a large dungeon, fight battles, fight a boss, rinse and repeat, hence its reputation of being a game played in a long hallway. It was hollow, to say the least, just as its story and characters. This game isn't bad, but it's just not that great either. It's just a slap in the face by a company that stopped caring about the fans of the original series. And it has no right to be called Final Fantasy anymore. It definitely is a JRPG that betrayed us. Number 1. Valkyrie Elysium. This is an action RPG developed by some dudes called Soleil. It was announced as a revival of the Valkyrie series, but not only that, as a reboot of them, which made fans of the saga conclude the series was officially dead, that this was clearly heading into a completely different direction by new developers that weren't Tri-Ace. I didn't need to play this poser to come here and declare it betrayed the fans, but I did, ladies and gentlemen. After slightly trying to impress me with some cool cinematics, gameplay-wise it disappointed me greatly. If it was an indie or a AA studio, I'd forgive it, but these graphics, despite the backgrounds and layouts being beautiful, feel somewhat low budget. The controls and movement remind me a bit of Star Ocean 6, but as an inferior version of it. Combat is still fun, I guess. You have your sword attacks with regular combos with the square and triangle buttons. You also have a magic system you can use by clicking the triggers, launching magic spells around. I like the little chain thing you use to jump forward to places or even to your enemies, but the hack and slash itself is nothing special. It truly felt like a sorry ripoff of DMC, which is why people like me often refer to this game as Valkyrie May Cry. In fact, it barely feels like an action RPG at all. Sure, you do level up, you have a skill tree and a weapon enhancement system. Both rely on acquiring gems or materials you find by destroying debris around, killing enemies, or opening chests. The skill tree actually lets you upgrade stats and get new abilities that are either offensive, defensive, or supportive. And finally, your warriors, known as the Anheriar, are not even party members. They're just summons that fight by themselves for a limited time until they vanish. It's sad. The story is bare bones. It just does not have the same powerful and deep impact the Profile trilogy had. It doesn't even come close or even tries to come close to those games, maybe to differentiate itself from them. Maybe to yell at the world that this is not Valkyrie Profile, that the series is freaking dead, and that Elysium is all we're gonna get from now on. As a hack and slash with RPG elements, it's alright. Nothing special, but it's entertaining. As a Valkyrie game, it's nothing but a blasphemy Square Enix spits on its fans shamelessly. This game is an insult to Valkyrie Profile. How do you feel about these JRPGs? Share whatever you wish in the comments and include other titles you really think betrayed the fans. And thanks for watching.